Okay, so today's workshop is going to be on managing presentations. My name is Kim Lombard and I'm an occupational therapist who works in UCD Access and Lifelong Learning. Just to kind of give an outcome or like an outline of what we're going to be looking at today is firstly, why presentations? Why are they being used as an assessment method? And what is being assessed when you're doing presentations? The elements of effective presentations. Number 3, looking at using technology, kind of PowerPoint and kind of Zoom and Brightspace workshops and different things like that. Number 4 is looking at group presentations and trying to manage group presentations. Number 5 is preparation to help manage nerves coming up to a presentation as well. And then finally, we'll look at a few tips for managing during the presentation itself. So firstly, our thoughts. Why do we think that a presentation might be used as an assessment method for our module? We might be wondering, what are they actually trying to assess when they give us a presentation to do for our module? There's a couple of things that they are assessing. Firstly, they're assessing your ability to public speak. So being able to engage with an audience and being able to provide information to them. I suppose then looking on that then is oral demonstration of your ability or knowledge. So it's kind of giving, for example, just describing topics in a concise way and in a coherent way. Also then discursive abilities. So being able, as I say there, to move from topic to topic in that kind of a logical kind of manner. And then also it's good for preparation for interviews for work, because actually, a lot of the times now workplaces do have interviews as part of the of an interview process. So by doing presentations and getting some experience in college, it will definitely help out with doing a presentation for a work interview in the future. So what is being assessed when they are assessing you with a presentation? There's a couple of elements here to look at. The first one is the content of the stuff that is in your presentation. Put it this way, if you have a topic to be assessed on, they want to see obviously if you have the appropriate content that you're presenting to them during that time. But not even that, it's looking then is also the timekeeping of presenting that content. So if we only have maybe 5 or 10 minutes to present something, there's only so much we can say during that time. So they're trying to see, are you keeping to a time frame while presenting sufficient content during that time? With that then, it's also clarity in what you're trying to present. So the way in which you are presenting, is it clear what point you are trying to make? The next thing then is questions. So it could be, for example, questions that are being asked of you during the presentation or maybe after the presentation. And are you able to kind of manage or deal with the questions that are being asked there and then? The next thing then is also the use of visual aids. And we're going to look into the use of visual aids in a few minutes as we get further into it. But essentially, visual aids are the likes of, let's say, PowerPoint presentations and things like that to help or guide or aid you as you're trying to present the material to your audience. And then also finally group work. Not all presentations obviously are based on group work, but some of them are. And I suppose having a group work presentation is a little bit different to having a presentation by yourself, because you're also trying to manage the kind of team element of doing a presentation there as well. So we're also going to discuss the group work presentations in a few minutes as well. So the elements of an effective presentation. The first one is to try give it thought, and I'm going to break these down in a minute. The next one then is the use of visual aids, as I've said before, and then also interacting with the audience. So these are the 3 kind of main elements to try incorporate for effective presentations. So for giving a thought, first and foremost, if you are provided with kind of like options for different topics you may present on, when choosing a topic, do seriously consider all of the options that are there, and don't automatically choose the topic that seems the easiest. And the reason why I say that is because if we choose a topic that may seem the easiest, it may actually not end up being the easiest. And actually, generally speaking, it's the topics that we have more interest in that generally tend to be the easier ones to present on. So before choosing what topic to do, I'd suggest using a mind map or kind of a spider diagram to brainstorm your ideas to then make the decision about what topic you wish to present on. And like I said, choose one that interests you or your group. The reason why is because if you're presenting on a topic that's interesting to you, it means that you don't need to rely as heavily on, let's say, your PowerPoint presentation or your flashcards and things like that, because it's a topic that more naturally comes to you. So as I said, do take time to give a thought before deciding on what particular topic to present on. Also think about the structure of your presentation and what may be a good structure to follow. So an example of this may be, for example, firstly you give the outline of the presentation, just like I did at the very start of this presentation. And what that does is that it gives your audience kind of like an expectation or an idea about what's going to come next or what you're going to present on. Then provide an introduction, such as kind of maybe a background, or provide a context to the topic that you are presenting on. Give your points, which are also backed up by research. Give your conclusion, and then you can ask, is there any questions that people may want to ask at that point? So, looking then at visual aids. What is the purpose of a visual aid? There's a couple of reasons why we may use visual aids to help with presentations. The first one is to help the audience to follow you as you speak. So for example, this is a very good example of a visual aid here, and I'm going to go through each of these points, and it helps the audience, you guys, follow as I'm speaking through it. The next thing then is that it takes the focus of you as the presenter and puts it onto your presentation. So this is where a visual aid can be useful for kind of taking the spotlight off you as the speaker and putting it onto a visual aid that gathers or captures your audience's attention. The other thing then is that it provides assistance to you as you speak. So for example, it provides kind of a little prompt for me to know what to say next. So it can be useful then to kind of use it as a way of guiding you through the presentation as you go. And then also it provides a lecturer or a tutor with evidence of your work. So it can be really useful to kind of have the visual aid such as a presentation or a PowerPoint presentation as as physical or tangible evidence of the work that you have done so far. So what are a few examples of visual aids? First one are things like handouts, which I obviously appreciate are much harder to do right now because we're all virtual due to COVID-19. But if in the future you do have a presentation on campus, providing handouts to your audience may be useful. Another one then is that you may have to do a poster presentation, which is where you create a big poster with all of your information on it, and you might have to present different material from it. The other thing then is an overhead projector. So that may be if you're on campus in the future and you have a projector on top and it's projecting the material onto a screen. Obviously right now the substitute for that is the likes of Zoom or Brightspace Collaborate Classrooms. The other thing then is Prezi. So Prezi is kind of like, if you want to Google it after this workshop, it's kind of like a more interactive and kind of fun PowerPoint presentation. And you can have some really cool kind of visuals. You can kind of zoom in and zoom out on different things. And you can kind of really customize it to the particular topic you're looking at. So definitely have a look at Prezi. Another one then, which is very much the one that comes to people's minds, are PowerPoints. So a PowerPoint presentation, such as the one that I'm giving right now, is an example of a visual aid. So the presentation itself is you actually providing the information verbally, but the visual aid is the likes of the PowerPoint presentation that accompanies that verbal, I suppose, discussion of it. The last thing then that may be useful for some modules or some courses are the use of props. So the reason why I say that is because let's say if you're talking about something that's maybe it's about a piece of equipment in the likes of engineering or science, or if it's an artifact or something like that. I know you may not necessarily actually have access to an artifact per se or pieces of equipment, but actually having some form of, pictures of the artifact or the piece of equipment, or if you do have access to certain things like that, actually bringing it and physically bringing it into a presentation can be useful, because as I said, it takes the audience's attention off you and it puts it onto the prop in which you are talking about. So, a few preliminary questions to ask yourself with a visual aid. Firstly is, what equipment is available to you? So obviously this may be a little bit different if we are doing a presentation virtually, such as on Zoom or Brightspace, in comparison to a presentation that's being done on campus, where you may be in a lecture theatre or a classroom. The next thing then is, do you know how to use the equipment? So obviously it's all well and good saying, yeah, I'm going to use Prezi, no problem. But if you don't actually know how to use it yet, that might be a good place to start. So having a look at figuring out how to use different pieces of technology or different pieces of equipment, such as how to share screen on Zoom or how to put together a PowerPoint presentation, things like that. Just become familiar with it, and then it makes you a lot more comfortable when you actually come to do your presentation then. The other thing then is, does the venue limit the choice that you have for visual aids? A very good example of this is that the virtual venues, which we're all in right now, limit the use of physical handouts, for example. So that might not be a good idea to use for virtual presentations, but could you use something else? The other, let's say, for example, in the virtual sphere, the good thing is that, let's say if it's on Zoom, you're actually able to present or to share your screen with a couple of different screens at the same time. So, there's pros and cons for different types of venues where you can use visual aids. So, but it's important to take the time to think about these things first before jumping into them. The other thing is then, what will other speakers be using? So this could be useful to kind of have a chat with maybe your classmates or people in your tutorial group or something like that, to just gain an idea about what visual aids other students in your class are also going to be using too, to give you a few ideas. The other thing then is, how long is your talk? This is very important to remember, like I said earlier, is that they're assessing your timekeeping skills here. And there's no point having 50 slides with loads of visual aids if you only have 5 minutes to talk. So it is important to kind of think about that and think about, does this visual aid give sufficient information in the time that I have to do it? And then, do you have a backup if the equipment fails? So for example, let's say if you've made your slides on PowerPoint, have you maybe backed them up on a USB stick in case something happens to the cloud or something like that, So just think about, these are the kind of preliminary questions to think about when you are looking at visual aids, so that you're more prepared when it comes to the actual presentation. It's not clicking for me, give me 2 seconds, there we go. So I suppose just a few general guidelines for visual aids is, firstly, try to avoid long sentences and paragraphs on the likes of a PowerPoint. I do appreciate that there is times where maybe we do have module coordinators who do generally tend to put maybe a big paragraph up on a slide, and that can be quite hard for an audience to read through and keep up with what's being said on the slide. So just use a visual aid, like I said, as a prompt. So it's to help guide you and the audience, rather than having every single word that you're going to be speaking up on the slide. It's more so just a prompt so you guys know where you're going next. The next thing then is to use graphs or diagrams if that's appropriate. So this may be appropriate for the likes of, let's say, science subjects, if you have a diagram you want to present on, or let's say if you're talking about a process in the likes of business, or maybe a particular theory that you can draw in a graph or a diagram in the likes of arts and humanities. So it is just to take a little bit of time to think about these things and how can you kind of adjust them a little bit. The next thing then is also to use images as appropriate. Obviously this may not always be appropriate for the material that we're doing, but it can be appropriate at times. And then also, which is very important, is do include your references as you go through your points. So if, as I said before, if you have points that are backed up by research, do include the references. It might be that you include the reference at, the citation at the end of a particular point, or you put maybe a little box towards the end of the slide or something like that. And then also provide a reference list at the end of your presentation as well, because not only does this help back up your points, but it demonstrates to your lecturers that you have been doing your research and you've been doing your reading, and that this presentation you've put a bit more work into it. So I suppose then, when you've had a think about it, then it's good to kind of run through a checklist then for your visual aid. Particularly for being on campus, firstly is, can all details be seen at the back of the room? So I know this may be a little bit different for virtual elements, but for on campus, if we have a slide that's full of loads of pictures and they're all teeny tiny, that's not useful for either you or the audience, because it's hard for them to see. So for example, can everything be seen from the back of the room if you are on campus? Is there irrelevant material to be removed? And this can be important for if you time yourself kind of going through your presentation, and if there's parts, let's say if you've gone over time, is there parts that maybe are not that relevant, or maybe could be kind of concise down or condensed down? That can be a useful thing to do. And sometimes having too many visual aids isn't useful either. So trying to make it very, very simple and not putting in too many is good as well. Are your materials free from spelling errors? So this obviously is a very important one for all aspects of our assessments, being assignments or presentations. Just running your presentation through like a spelling and grammar checker on the likes of Microsoft and PowerPoint and different things like that is really, really useful. And also sometimes getting somebody else to have a look at it. So be it maybe a friend or a family member or something, just to have a look through your work, because sometimes with a pair of fresh eyes, little mistakes may be highlighted that you can't actually see yourself. And then, are all your facts correct? So don't forget, this is you providing information verbally to other people. So it's important, obviously, that the facts that we do present are correct. So this is why, as I said, including your references and including where your citations can be useful, because it demonstrates that the information you are presenting has come from a credible source. The other thing then is, have you shown too much detail? This is what I mean a little bit earlier with having too many visual aids. Is there just a little bit too much to manage at the same time? If you kind of find you're trying to talk very, very quickly to kind of get the material done, or there's a lot going on the slide, that might indicate that you have too much detail on that one particular slide. So maybe try to break it up a little bit, or like I said, try to remove some material that might be more irrelevant. And then overall, is your message clearly articulated using a visual aid? So this is what I mean, is that that's what these aids are, is to aid you in being able to give the material verbally. And so like I said, if it's not a relevant piece of material or a relevant visual aid, then that's okay to remove it. So I don't know what, there we go. Who is your audience then? And this is a really important one to consider for any presentation we do, be it in college or in the future or in other organizations or whatever it is. Particularly for college, it's not to forget that the likelihood is that you will have either your lecturer or a tutor in your audience, as well as fellow students. And what can be important here is, I suppose, firstly, with the aspect of the tone in which you approach that presentation. It's not to forget that we do need to be, somewhat professional for all of our presentations in college. And you may wish to use the likes of humor and things like that if it's appropriate. If you don't feel it is appropriate, then don't include it. But if you feel it might be, you might give a little bit of kind of lightheartedness to a presentation that warrants it, then that's okay to include. What can be useful is to really practice the presentation in front of others. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about preparation for the presentation. But practicing in front of other people can be really, really useful before ever actually doing the actual thing on the day. So I suppose when it comes to interacting with your audience, there's a few things to bear in mind. The first one is your voice. So there's a couple of elements of this to look at. The first one is the pace in which you are speaking at. So if you're speaking too fast, which as Irish people generally tend to do at times, I know myself, we can speak quite fast at times. So sometimes just slowing down, taking a breath, and really slowing it down makes it easier for your audience to understand you. The next thing then is the volume. So you don't want to speak too loud, but you don't want to speak too quietly either, because you don't want to be shouting at your audience, but you want them to be able to hear you as well. So having quite a volume of your voice that allows you to kind of keep their attention, but not be shouting at them is a good way to go. The next thing is the articulation, and this is why it's important, particularly from the pace perspective, is to make sure that you are articulating your words as best you can. And the reason why that is because it's to keep your audience understanding up as you go throughout the presentation. And then generally speaking, it's just the overall clarity of your voice as you are going through the presentation. Can your audience understand what you're saying? And as I said, practicing in front of other people can be really useful to do this first, because it gets those initial nerves out and done with, and the people you practice for can say, I didn't really understand this point because you spoke too fast, or different things like that. So the next thing is your body language. As I do appreciate that right now, it's a very different ball game being on a virtual sphere. Sure, I'm presenting this presentation virtually, which is a little bit weird. I'm normally doing it on campus with a group of students in front of me. So obviously, it might be that you might be sitting or you might be standing for the presentation. And the other thing then is projecting confidence as well. So it's more so being able to project confidence in what the material is that you are presenting, and you're confident in discussing that particular material verbally. And that's really what an audience are. They can follow you a lot more if that's the case. The next thing then is being relaxed as well. So it's more so, being able to, lower your shoulders, take a deep breath, and take each slide as it comes, rather than trying to fly through all of the slides to get it done really, really quickly. And then the next thing is making eye contact, which obviously is quite important, particularly if we are on campus, to make eye contact with other people in the audience. I appreciate right now it's particularly hard because, for example, do you look, if it's a Zoom lecture, do you look at the camera up here, or do you look at the slides, or, it's hard to kind of know where to look. But I suppose what's important is to try be as engaging as possible in that sense. So it might be that you do look around to maybe different people's faces on the Zoom call, and that's okay. Even if they're not actually making eye contact with you per se. It's just more so to try make the workshop or the presentation a little bit more interactive. So using technology then. So PowerPoint generally tends to be the first one that most people think about when it comes to using like a visual aid for their presentation, such as the one I'm using right now. So obviously a few things to consider when you are putting together a PowerPoint presentation is firstly the color in which you use on the presentation, as well as the background, particularly how both of those things interact together. Because if you use, for example, a white background with a very bright yellow font or something like that, it can be very hard for your audience and even for you to actually be able to read it. So making sure that there's a good color contrast there so it's easy to read your presentation. The next thing is also using or looking at the particular font that you use. So a font that is called sans serif font is the best really for reading for most people, be it people in your audience and also you as the presenter as well. It's the easiest type of font to be reading. And then also images as well, and I kind of talked about this earlier with the visual aids. Making sure you don't have too many images on a particular slide, maybe one or two might be enough. If you need to include a couple to maybe explain a process or something like that, spread them out over a couple of slides, because having one slide with let's say 10 or 12 kind of images on it can be quite overwhelming for both you and the audience. You can also find some technical support on how to use PowerPoint for doing presentations on the Microsoft website as well. So this is normally a slide that isn't normally in this presentation when we've done them previously, but this is more so looking at using Zoom or Brightspace for doing presentations at the moment as well. There's just a few tips to kind of help out. The first one is, do try to clear up your background where at all possible. I do appreciate that all of us obviously are trying to work and study from home right now, and that can be it's a particularly tough aspect to try and manage, because it's our kind of our private space, and then we're doing a little more publicly with class. But if you can, even just finding maybe a blank wall behind you or something like that, that isn't full of personal items or different things that you wouldn't want, let's say, the audience to see, different things like that, can be a useful thing to do. It also just doesn't detract from you actually trying to present as well, and so it makes it a little bit more simple or a little bit cleaner as you're presenting. The other thing as well is to familiarize yourself with the settings and the equipment. And I'll be totally honest with you, all of us in Access and Lifelong Learning, when we all went virtual back in March, we spent several sessions trying to, let's say, get used to Brightspace, the Collaborate room, the Zooms, how to share screens, different things like that. And that's okay. We hadn't known how to do it before, and now we do know how to do it. But that's the same with you guys too. Taking the time to kind of get familiar with, how do I share a screen on Zoom, or what happens when I do that? What does it look like? Going on to a Zoom call by yourself is okay. You can still do that. And I think it's free. And just trying to present, share a particular screen so that you know what it looks like, so that it's not completely unfamiliar to you. The other thing then, like I said before, is to try practice the presentation for friends and family. This not also kind of helps with developing your confidence to present with other people, but it also allows them to give you feedback on how you're doing in a constructive way. So for example, they may say, you're speaking very fast, you need to slow down, or I didn't really understand what you were talking about in this particular case. And I appreciate that maybe our friends or family don't know the ins and outs of the content in which we are trying to present. But like we said, you're not just being assessed on the content in a presentation. There's a couple of other elements that they can really give some assistance with as well. The other thing is, where possible, is to try minimize potential interruptions. So that might mean, let's say if you live at home with your family, or you have kids or different things like that, sitting down with them and telling them, I have a presentation to give at X time, I can't be disturbed during this time, or whatever it is, can be really, really useful. And then also the important thing here is to dress comfortable but professional. There's no point in obviously being very uncomfortable in the clothes that we're wearing when we're presenting. It's something that you're able to kind of move in and breathe in is good. But at the same time, we need to remain professional, particularly for presentations in college as well. So, group presentations then. Like we said, there's a couple of different elements here. The advantages of group presentations is that it allows people to share ideas, give different perspectives on a topic, understand the material more clearly, and have kind of experience of discussion about different things. But the challenges of kind of group presentations include things like an unequal workload, possibly unreliable members, a lack of open dialogue for things, even maybe poor listening skills from some members, and also anxiety either around the group element of itself or doing a presentation as a group. We did have a workshop last week on managing group work, and I do suggest, for looking at more details around this, going back to that workshop, because it looks at things like setting ground rules, allocating roles, and how to manage communication strategies. I won't be going into those in detail for this presentation. I'll just be looking at managing group presentations. I suppose for strategies to manage group presentations, there's a few things that can help here. The first one is obviously to try collaborate with your group members, show respect for everyone's perspective that we have, and also share the knowledge. So it is a group presentation. So for example, if you're presenting on a particular topic and Mary is presenting on another one, and you have a piece of maybe information that could really help with Mary's section, do share that knowledge and kind of collaborate in that way. The other thing then is, as a group member, is obviously to allocate the different responsibilities, but to meet your responsibilities that you need to do before meeting your group again. Particularly from a practical sense for Zoom is you need to kind of decide, is one person going to be managing the slides, or are each of you going to be presenting your own slides yourself? So what I mean by that is that on Zoom, if one person is managing the slides, they're the ones who are clicking next slide, next slide, next slide, even if they're not the ones necessarily talking. Or would you guys prefer that each person shares the screen at the respective time in which they talk, and that they can control their own slides? It's some of these things that we maybe didn't really need to think about before, which we do need to think about now, and it can be important to have that conversation with your group. The other thing then is to try and meet regularly and to use technology where possible. So by that I mean, it might be, for example, using, trialing out Zoom or trying out a Brightspace classroom with each other well in advance of the presentation, so that it's not the first, you've already run through it a couple of times and everybody knows when they're to start speaking and when the next person is speaking, and so on and so forth. And the other thing then is, as I said, practice together, but give constructive feedback. So, maybe if it's that, oh, I didn't really understand this point, or maybe if we switch these two slides around or something, that might make a little bit more sense. So it's just more so giving constructive feedback to improve the presentation for your audience. So a few pieces of technology that can help with group presentations is firstly a thing called Trello, which I think Fiona covered in the group work presentation last week anyway. But Trello is kind of like a project management app that allows you to kind of break down tasks and assign them to particular group members. So it makes it very clear on who is doing what and what your responsibilities are and what you need to do before you meet next. Particularly for a presentation then, another thing that could be useful is to use the likes of slides in Google Drive, because everyone can have access to them at the same time and can be adding things in as time goes on, and it's all in the one file. And that means then that you can kind of see how does your stuff relate to the material that other people are presenting as well. And then obviously it's important as a group then at the end to go through that to see, does it make sense or does it flow well as things go on. And then lastly then, like I said before, is try out practicing with Zoom. Go on to a Zoom call with your group members and try out sharing screen or presenting to one another or seeing how fast people talk or different things like that, and give constructive feedback. So, I don't know what has happened to my slides here. I don't know what's happened here, but essentially to kind of help with preparation, to help manage nerves, what can be useful is go through your presentation slides when you've put them all together and kind of write out kind of a presentation script or some notes in the PowerPoint section notes under the slide that you have. But this script isn't going to be read out, itself during the presentation. That's not what the use of it is. It's more so for you to kind of get your ideas flowing and to figure out what points are you trying to make on a particular slide. Once you have that material down, then you can start looking at, creating flashcards or cue cards, and then you can use that to make prompts, such as using main words or different points and things like that. So it means that you've already run through the stuff that you would like to use, or the stuff that you would like to talk about, I should say. But the flashcards or cue cards, if that's something you wish to use, are there just as a prompt. Remember, like I said before, the visual aid is a prompt to help you move on to the next point, rather than reading it word for word off the slide. So the preparation to help manage nerves. So just to continue on with this a little bit more. Firstly, like I said it before, is familiarize yourself with the venue and technology. It's really, really important that we get familiar with where we're going to be presenting, what's the environment we're going to be in, What technology do I need to use? Do I know how to share my screen? Do I know how to open my PowerPoint and just click next? Things like that. Because it just means that you don't need to figure out that stuff for the first time when it comes to the actual presentation. The next thing which can be useful is to try be your own audience at times. So by that I mean, try recording yourself or practice in front of a mirror, just to see if, are you clear on what you're trying to say? Are your thoughts in a coherent manner? And then listening back over and trying to make adjustments as needs be. As I said before, it's practicing for trusted friends and family and seek feedback if possible. And another important point, which I've kind of mentioned a few times already, is timing yourself to make sure that you have the right amount of material in the time allotted. Like I said, one of the points that your lecturers are assessing you on is timekeeping. And if we have let's say we only have 5 minutes to present and we have 50 slides, that's way too many to do. I think I can't even do the maths on what that would be per slide. So it's timing yourself when you put your presentation together, get your phone out, stick on the timer or the stopwatch. Just time yourself to see how long it takes you to get through the material, and then you can go back and say, okay, I'm an extra 5 minutes over here. What parts do I need to cut out, or what parts are not very relevant? And then also, it's keeping a positive mental attitude towards it. I do appreciate that presentations can be stressful, and particularly if you haven't had a lot of experience of doing them before. But it is to remember that your lecturers know that you are nervous, and not to forget they too, at one point in the past, have started as somebody who had never presented before. And they also want you to succeed. Lecturers it's their job every single day to get up and present to a group of people. So it kind of comes naturally to most of them. But when you don't have a lot of experience of doing it, I understand the nerves can be a little bit higher. But do remember that the lecturers do want you to succeed and get through this. So the other thing that can be useful for kind of preparing is using the Rehearse with Coach feature in PowerPoint. So a lot of people actually don't know about this feature, but essentially if you go onto PowerPoint and you click Slideshow and then Rehearse with Coach, it gives you two really beneficial things. Firstly, it gives you real-time guidance on your performance. So for example, if you're speaking too fast, it'll say, you need to slow down or something like that. And then at the end, it also gives you a summary report, which looks at things like the pace in which you were speaking, the total time it took. I actually think it might even give you a breakdown per slide as well. And then also the feedback on how to improve. So it's some really constructive stuff that you then can take and to try improve the presentation that you have. So the next thing then, just for helping out with the preparation, is to evaluate your performance. So for example, is there parts of the presentation that you're stumbling on? Keep practicing, or maybe reorganize the material so that it makes a little bit more sense for you on the actual day. Do you find that you're tongue twisted? Do try to slow down. Even having maybe a prompt somewhere on your screen or on a flashcard to try slow down can be useful. If you find that you're out of breath, add breathing cues to your flashcards too. So you might, for example, put a little post-it note that says breathe on your screen, or have a flashcard that says breathe. Or for example, every time you change slides, taking a moment to take a deep breath. If you find that you're losing your place, then add more visual marks or space out the content and kind of insert reminders or prompts for yourself throughout the presentation. This is what I mean is, if we have too much information on a slide, and if we lose our place, it can be very hard then when we're looking at it to pick back up where we were. So trying to space things out, but having some useful prompts throughout the place can be useful and to kind of refocus you or re-guide you about where you're going next. And if do you find that you're kind of approaching it in a bit of a monotone way, do try accenting your various parts of your speech for greater impact and engagement as well. So, calming nerves prior to a presentation. If possible, plan out the day in advance. So let's say, for example, a presentation is coming at 12 p.m. on a Thursday. Plan out that day in advance. what can be useful is to maybe engage in a physical activity that morning, just to kind of get your body moving and getting those nerves out by moving your body, or also engaging in an activity that might calm you. So it might be looking at meditation, or going for, let's say a short walk, calling a friend, something like that. The other thing then is it can be useful to go find a quiet space and to focus on your breathing for about 5 to 10 minutes before going into the presentation. It's more just to get a little bit of a calm kind of space before you jump into it, and to kind of focus on that breathing and really slow it down where possible. So, tips for managing during the presentation. And I see my slides got squished a little bit here. I think somebody has said Brightspace squashes the images. Yes, on Brightspace, which I wasn't aware of until now. See what I mean about getting used to the technology. So obviously, one thing that you can do is to pause for a drink of water, particularly if, let's say, you're not sure what your next point is, or let's say if your mouth is getting a little bit dry and stuff. It is absolutely no problem to take a moment to stop, have a glass of water next to you, just like I do, and take a moment to stop, take a breath, and have a drink of water and start back into it again. That is totally okay. The next thing is to take a deep breath. And like I said, you might decide to include, let's say, a little post-it note next to your camera that says breathe on it, or on your flashcards, or every time you change slides, you take a deep breath. It's more so to just pace yourself a little bit more so that you don't run out of your breath or can't catch up with it. The other thing then is that it's absolutely okay to excuse yourself and adjust your equipment if necessary. If you're having issues with the technology, literally just say that, just say, apologies, a little bit of technical error here, give me a moment and we'll resume, and just try figure it out, take a deep breath, try figure it out, and then resume from there. It's absolutely no problem. And like I said, your lecturers are aware that you are nervous. So they don't mind if you take a drink of water or take a deep breath or different things like that. It's showing that you are keeping control of the presentation itself. So the last few things is firstly kind of dealing with audience questions. So first and foremost, always ask an audience member to clarify a question if you are not sure what they're asking. So let's say if a lecturer or a student asks you a particular question about something, just say, sorry, do you mind clarifying that for me a little bit? Or could you ask that in a different way? Or I don't really understand what you're asking me. Do you mind asking it in a different way? The next thing then is to pause and reflect before answering that particular question. So don't just launch straight in to try answer it, to fill the silence that in between when the question is asked and when the answer is given. It's okay to take a moment to kind of think about it and say, well, actually, this is what, in relation to what you're asking, this is what I think. So it's okay to do that because it allows you to just gather your thoughts a little bit more before jumping back into it. The other thing then is if you're in a group presentation, and generally speaking, this tends to happen if you're the last person to present and a question gets asked. Sometimes it can get asked to you, but that might not be the particular thing that you were presenting on. So try your best to give an answer and then say, okay, Mary also presented on this particular thing, so they may be able to provide a bit more information than I can as well. And then lastly is being honest if you don't know the answer to a question. It's absolutely okay if a question's asked you a couple of times and you've attempted to answer it, and maybe the question, then the lecturer maybe has asked it in a different way or something like that. It's okay to say, this is what I do know, but I'll need to look into that a little bit further and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I don't know the exact answer to that question right now. It's answer what you can on the spot, if possible, and then say, it's okay to admit that at times we don't know all of the answers, but that you'll look into it, or you haven't considered that perspective and you'll look into it again going forward. So we're just at the end here for questions. I'm just going to stop recording. Does anybody have any questions at all? Thank you, Sean. It was that Brightspace squashes the images like this. It's very annoying. If anybody has any questions, anything like that, just pop them into the chat, and then otherwise, this recording will be going up on the Brightspace module anyway. I don't think so. Nope, I don't think so at the moment. No, there's nothing coming up, but that's okay, guys. Look, thank you very much for coming along to this. No problem at all, Sean. Thank you very much. I hope I was able to present the module or the workshop well on presentations. And look, like I said, it'll go up on our Brightspace module. And I think the next one is next week before the revision break as well. All right, everyone. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you soon.